North Carolina, South Carolina, what's the difference and where should you move if you're coming to the South? I get calls, texts, emails every single day from people just like you looking to make the move to Charlotte, North Carolina and the surrounding areas. Now, if that's you, be sure to go ahead, call, text, email, whether it's 9 days or 90 days, you're moving across town or across the country. I'd love to make your move exactly what you want it to be. You can also set up a Zoom call. All my contact information is below. I look forward to talking to you. So before we dive into some of the difference between North and South Carolina, let's find out how it came to be. Let's go back in history, back to the 17th century, and talk about when our colonies were first created. I know, we're going back to middle school and elementary school and learning all about this all over again. What many people didn't know is North and South Carolina were one colony. That's right, they were called the Carolinas. Now, with that being said, as the Carolinas grew, it actually became way too much for them to manage, and instead, they split them out. In 1712, it was split between North Carolina and South Carolina, and since that time moving forward, we have been two separate states with many similarities, not just in the name. So let's dive into some of these similarities and differences and share with you exactly what might make North or South Carolina the best spot to call home. Now, one of the first things that I always want to point out when we're talking about both North and South Carolina, not only is North Carolina larger, but the population is actually far greater. In fact, almost double that of South Carolina. With over 10 million people in North Carolina, South Carolina comes in at only about 5 million people. Now, you might say that that's a pretty big difference, and I would definitely agree. But as we go through some of these pros and cons and differences, you're going to notice why North Carolina is so much more populated than its sister/brother in the South, South Carolina. Now, in addition to population, the cost of living is fairly similar between the two states. Overall cost of living in South Carolina is 88.5%, while in North Carolina it's 90%. Now, this is coming down from the 100% average that we would see for across the country. So it'd be the US average in general would be 100%. So both are lower than the US average, but both of them are pretty close when it comes to cost of living in general compared to the two of them. Now, one difference that starts to really spread out does have to do with housing. And we're talking about the actual average home price between North and South Carolina. South Carolina comes in at 73%, while North Carolina is at 81%. This is a big difference. Now, again, what you're going to notice is because of the population density, there are more cities, which we're going to get to in North Carolina, which does cost a little bit more to be in a city. So those prices are going to be a little bit higher. The more rural areas available, the less the price or average price of a home in a particular state. So keep that in mind. Now, we're talking about populations in both states. As I mentioned, North Carolina is about 10 million. In fact, it's closer to 10,500,000 if we were really to look at averages. And in South Carolina, it's closer to 5,100,000. So definitely very different when we're talking about population. It's also worth noting that there's been an increase in the population density or population of those of 65 and older. South Carolina has about 18% of its population of 65 and older, while North Carolina follows the trend of about 16% of their population being 65 years and older. Now, if you're looking for more information on moving to North Carolina as a retiree, definitely check out one of my other videos regarding retiring to North Carolina. One of the biggest reasons we've seen an increase in this particular population is because of what? Warm weather, great taxes, great location, and of course the actual average price being lower when it comes to cost of living. In addition to this, we've seen a high population of both New Yorkers as well as Californians moving into this area, again, because of the lower cost of living, as well as higher benefits when it comes to the size of the home that you can get for your dollar. So let's jump into education. Education is the #2 question that I get from anyone moving into the area. How are the schools? What can we expect? Obviously, you want the best for your children. Let's talk a little bit about it. Now, both North and South Carolina are very much similar when it comes to school, what's available, and what the ratings are on those school systems. Both North and South Carolina, their schools are run based on elected officials in different districts. This means that it's not just one major entity that's running this, it's actually you get the opportunity to elect an official that's going to help in the school board. One of the biggest differences that you're going to see in North and South Carolina is because North Carolina has so much more when it comes to population, as I said, almost double that of South Carolina, you're also going to see that they have a higher population of students across the state. Now, this isn't anything to be worried by. In fact, it's still a student-teacher ratio of 15-1, whether you're in North Carolina or South Carolina. It just means North Carolina has more schools than South Carolina. This is all because of population, and schools are being built every single year to make sure that we have enough teachers and enough facilities to harbor those particular students that are looking at a better education. So let's talk about higher education and colleges. I know when I was younger, I grew up in New York. My parents were bound for Virginia because they thought Virginia Tech was where I was going to go to college. Well, we ended up in North Carolina, and I'm so happy we did. North Carolina actually has some of the most state-run colleges in the college system. Now, very interestingly, South Carolina also offers quite a bit when it comes to public education for colleges. Now, this is both community college, you also have your state colleges and universities, you have private college, liberal arts colleges, and in addition to that, there's also trade schools depending upon what you want to learn or how you want to learn it. Now, one thing to note, North Carolina has a very large congregation of colleges in the Triangle area. This is in the Raleigh-Durham area of North Carolina. It's a little bit further out east than Charlotte, but what you're going to find is NC State. You're going to find private colleges like Meredith College. You're going to find more private colleges that are bigger, such as Duke University. You're also going to find Chapel Hill and other such schools. Now, all these schools have great sports programs, great education, but it's going to depend upon what you desire. As a Wolfpack graduate myself, we know that every school is different. For NC State, we always used to say it is easy to get in, hard to stay and graduate, versus our, of course, arch nemesis, Chapel Hill, which was hard to get in and easy to stay in and get a degree. Whatever college you went to, it is okay. North Carolina harbors all kinds of college graduates, all the way up to Appalachian State and Western Carolina, and all the way out to the coast in Wilmington. There are a ton of options. Now, when it comes to South Carolina, two of the largest schools in South Carolina are going to be Clemson University, or the Clemson Tigers, and of course, the University of South Carolina, known as the Gamecocks. Now, while there's plenty of rivalries that go on, all of these higher levels of education are phenomenal when you're looking across the board, especially across the country. All of their ratings, scores, both sports and academia, all come out on top when you're comparing it to the rest of the country. So is North Carolina, South Carolina better? Who knows? But what it really comes down to is, what do you want to study? Where do you want to go? And what suits your interests? For me, Wolfpack for life. Let's talk a little bit about the topography and a little bit of outdoors when it comes to both states. Now, if you are looking for the mountains, North Carolina is going to win. Why? Well, about a quarter of the state is covered in mountainous terrain, whether it be the hill country all the way up to into places like Mount Mitchell, which is the highest point on the East Coast. North Carolina has some of the best locations, the best towns and cities for you in the mountains. Both Boone, as well as Asheville, North Carolina, and other such cities are growing and bustling, not only with industry and opportunity for jobs, but it's also expanding. In fact, Asheville, North Carolina has plenty of places that are slated for growth and building when it comes to residential properties over the next 10 years. Now, the next thing to add is a little bit more infrastructure, and they will be off to the races. One other thing to note, if you're looking for mountainous activities, you're usually going to be looking for hiking, ziplining, mountain biking, as well as skiing. All of these activities are things you're going to find in North Carolina. Does South Carolina have mountains? It does, but they are only up in the northwestern portion of South Carolina, and they're not as tall mountains as you might find or expect in North Carolina. So can you get some hills? Can you get some mountains? Can you get some beautiful views? Yes, you can get that in South Carolina, but you're not going to find as many of the activities that you might find in North. So no river rafting, no skiing or snowboarding. It's just not there. So if you're really looking for all of the mountainous activities you can possibly find, North Carolina is definitely going to win in this particular category. Okay, so we talked about mountains, let's talk about lakes. That's right, lake living is a big thing, and if you want to live on the biggest man-made lake in the East Coast, not just in the Carolinas, on the East Coast, you're going to want to go to Lake Norman. Lake Norman sits just 20 minutes north of downtown Charlotte, which means what? You can have lake living and vacation style living and still commute to work in under 30 minutes. That's fantastic. So I would say that North Carolina wins this out. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that Charlotte in and of itself actually flanks 3 major lakes: Lake Norman, Mountain Island Lake, we can add in the Catawba River there, but I'm not going to count that right now, and Lake 𝗖𝘁. All of these are going to flank the western side of Charlotte. So when you're looking for a city that also has lake living, that's going to be your winner. Now, does South Carolina have lakes too? Absolutely. And I know I'm specifying Charlotte, but hey, that's where I live. Some other lakes are going to include in South Carolina, Lake Keowee, Lake 𝗖𝘁, honestly, because it's just to the west of both Rock Hill and Fort Mill, Lake Marion, and several other smaller lakes that are spread across the state. Now, in addition to the lakes that are just next to Charlotte, you're also going to find some beautiful lakes outside of the Charlotte area. High Rock Lake, Lake James are just a few. Now, if you want to go further east or further west, I could name even more, but those are the ones that are more central to the Charlotte and big city area. So if you're looking for lake living, you definitely want to check out Charlotte and the suburbs of Charlotte. So I would say Cornelius, Davidson, Denver, Harrisburg, any of those areas. Actually, probably Huntersville would be a better one. But there's several lakes, several opportunities to be in the city or rural and find the perfect community for you. So I think North Carolina wins on this one. Bigger cities. So if you're looking for cities, this is going to go back to population. As I said earlier, North Carolina has double the population of South Carolina. What that means is there's going to be higher population density in certain towns and cities in North Carolina than South. If you're looking for more of a city feel, North Carolina absolutely wins with more opportunity for different cities in North Carolina. South Carolina does have cities, but they are fewer and far between. If you're looking for something a little bit more rural and quiet, South Carolina might be for you. But don't be confused on this. North Carolina also has some beautiful rural towns across the state, whether you want to be on the East Coast near the water or up in the mountains. There's an opportunity everywhere in between. However, North Carolina does have more cities such as Asheville, Charlotte, Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, out east in Greensboro. You also have the central areas, which is going to include Greensboro, High Point, areas in that area. Now, you're also going to find large areas when it comes to Army bases. So Fayetteville is a huge hub for the military. Fayetteville and the surrounding areas has grown to quite a big city, although sprawling. It's definitely another opportunity for city-like atmosphere. And last but not least, don't forget about Wilmington. Wilmington is actually one of the largest port cities on the East Coast. Where? North Carolina. So whether you're going from the mountains all the way to the coast, you're going to find a city that meets the needs you have. Now in South Carolina, yes, they do have cities. Your most major cities are going to be Columbia, which is about an hour and a half south of Charlotte, as well as Charleston. Charleston is going to be on the East Coast. Beautiful communities, great place to go visit, and their food is absolutely phenomenal. What you will find in Charleston is the home prices are crazy. That's right. It is the highest cost when it comes to homes and living and lifestyle. So cost of living in Charleston, way higher than most of the cities, even in North Carolina. Other major cities in South Carolina are going to be the Greenville, Spartanburg area, which are closer to the hill country, which is in that northwestern portion that we talked about, where it's a little bit more mountainous. That's going to be on the foothills of that mountainous area. So are there options? Absolutely. But once again, North Carolina wins if you want some city feel. All right, this brings us to beaches. That's right, we're going to talk about the coast. Which one wins, North or South Carolina? If you guess North Carolina, you guess right again. Now, what do I base this on? Well, a lot of it has to do with the availability or how much beach is actually able to be seen and touched. North Carolina has some of the largest coastline available on the East Coast. Now, if you're counting Long Island in New York and you stretch that out, then North Carolina would be in just about third place behind Florida and Long Island. Now, what's encompassing this is not only the southern shore of North Carolina, just underneath Wilmington, but also the very long and very interconnected Outer Banks. Now, the Outer Banks are extremely well known, as I'm sure most of you know this, and there's also a TV show out, not super accurate, but that's okay, we're on the map. But the Outer Banks are an interconnected barrier islands on the coast of North Carolina. This makes up a ton of shoreline that you can enjoy year-round. Now, one of the interesting things is you can ride the entire coastline, but it would take hours upon hours. That's right, it's not actually as quick and easy to get to the northern part of the Outer Banks and duck in those sorts of areas as you might think. Now, why did I put this as the win for North Carolina? It has way more coastline than South Carolina and way more available beaches to be visited by the public. Now, one thing to note with South Carolina is a lot of the public beaches are quite small and a little bit difficult to get to, whereby North Carolina not only has a major city, Wilmington, on the coast, but also has several not only islands but beaches all along the North Carolina border, such as Topsail Island, Figure 8, and further south from that has several other barrier islands such as Oak Island, Ocean Island, and Holden Beach. So if you're looking for the best opportunity for beachfront property or just to go visit for vacation, check out North Carolina beaches. You can also rent properties such as houses and condos or hotels all along the beach line. One other thing that I will note, in South Carolina, it is much more common for you to find hotels on the beach than North Carolina. In North Carolina, you're going to find more homes or condos for rent through places like Airbnb, VRBO, and other such vacation rental property. But if you're looking for more of the hotel style, definitely check out Myrtle Beach, which is in South Carolina. I know it's a big fan favorite from those coming from New York and up north, but be sure to check out Charleston in South Carolina as well, which gives you way more culture and way better food. So regardless of what beaches you like, both are great options, but North Carolina definitely takes the cake for availability and more beachfront. Okay, this takes to me one of my favorite points, and we're still talking about beaches here. I love to surf. That's right, surfing is one of my favorite things. In fact, Surf City is one of the best places to go in North Carolina for surfing. Now, here's one of the best things to note. When it's talking about the East Coast, North Carolina is actually one of the best places to go for surfing. I know, crazy, you would think Florida, but North Carolina is actually one of the best places for surf. In fact, those that live in South Carolina will take a trip to North Carolina just for the surfing. So if the name wasn't already there, Surf City is one of those big hubs. It sits on Topsail Island just north of Wilmington. Now, it doesn't matter where you go in North Carolina, you're gonna find great surf, and it's because of the way that the East Coast is oriented. If you take a look at a map, North Carolina kind of juts out a little bit into the water, which gives even better surfing. Now, another thing to note has to do with the water temperatures. In North Carolina, the water temperatures stay warm through into the fall, which gives you a little bit longer time to go out and surf. Now, in addition to that, you're going to find a really big difference between northern North Carolina, where you're up on the border of Virginia, and all the way down to the southernmost point of North Carolina, which is south of Wilmington, closer to Ocean Island. Why? It has to do with, of course, how far north you're going. So the further south you go, the warmer the waters and the longer they stay warm. In addition to that, the quicker they warm up in summer. So if you're looking for great surfing and that's something you desire, definitely North Carolina takes the cake. So let's talk about climate. You'd think that these climates are pretty similar, being they're right next to each other. Well, when it comes to North and South Carolina, you're going to see some differences. South Carolina stays more moderate throughout the year, and yes, you're going to have hot summers and mild winters, but you're not going to see really any snow. Versus North Carolina, you will see snow. Now, granted, the further south you go in North Carolina, you're going to see less snow, but North Carolina has more variable temperatures. So you do have hot summers, but the winters are usually just a little bit colder. I say colder. You barely have to pull out your winter jacket if you don't get cold often, and you're going to see mild snow. I'm talking just maybe 3 to 5 inches in most areas of North Carolina throughout the season. South Carolina, however, pretty much no snow. If you see snow, it's shocking. In addition, if you're in Charlotte, you're going to see snow maybe up in Mooresville, which is on the northern side of Charlotte. But if you go down to Rock Hill, South Carolina, just over the border, usually that same snowstorm will not drop anything. It's really interesting to watch, and it's always fun when you can drive just a little bit north and get a little bit of sledding in. But if you're looking for more mild temperatures, South Carolina in winter is definitely going to be a better bet for you. So let's talk about real estate taxes. That's right. Property taxes are something that a lot of people are interested in finding out about, especially if they're making the move and they're wanting to be right on that border of North and South Carolina. What are the benefits? Well, both states actually have no inheritance tax, which means they're both going to be side by side when it comes to which one is the best state. However, South Carolina has some of the best property taxes for primary residents in the country. In fact, it's rated 45th in the country, while North Carolina comes in at 31st. If you're right on the border and you're not sure where to go and you're going to be a primary resident, meaning you're going to live in the house, South Carolina is definitely the way to go. Now, here's a little caveat. If you are not a primary resident, that means you're buying a property as an investment. North Carolina is going to win. Why? South Carolina actually, if you are a property owner that has an investment property, that investment property that you're not living in is going to have a higher tax rate because it's not your primary residence. In fact, one of the counties bordering the Columbia, South Carolina area called Richland County has a 5x tax ratio. What that means is if you are renting that property, you're not living there as a primary residence, your taxes are 5 times higher because you're a non-primary resident. That means if you're renting that property and the taxes are $2,000 with you as the primary, but now you're renting the property, taxes just jump to $10,000. Definitely make sure that you're picking the right agent and talking about these factors when you are looking for a property to determine if you're wanting to rent it or own it and what your plans for the property are. So in this fact, if you are looking to rent properties and build a portfolio, then North Carolina definitely takes the cake. Now, when it comes to professional sports, there is absolutely no comparison. North Carolina wins. Between the Charlotte Hornets, the Charlotte Panthers, or the Carolina Panthers, we still claim them because they play in our area, the Carolina Hurricanes, and the Charlotte Knights, we have some of the top performing teams in the country. Now, yes, we do share the Panthers and we do share our hockey team with South Carolina, but they live, practice, and play in North Carolina, making them, in my mind, more of a North Carolina team. So yeah, we take the cake. Now, if you're looking for college sports, you might lean a little bit more towards South Carolina with the Carolina Gamecocks from the University of South Carolina, as well as, if you're into football, Clemson, which has some of the best football teams that they have put out over year. So take your pick, whichever one you want to follow, but we still will be your friend if you're in a different state rooting for our team. So if you pick South Carolina, it's okay. So let's talk about that Southern charm and some historic towns. Which one is the best? Which one has more, North or South Carolina? Well, both of these states have some phenomenal historic impacts and cities that you can go and visit. There is always one that has more than the other. Now, granted, North Carolina is a lot larger, so you're going to find more historic towns and cities throughout the North Carolina area. But in my personal opinion, my favorite historic town is going to be in South Carolina. Charleston, South Carolina has some absolutely beautiful plantations and homes, not only in the city, but just outside of, that you can also go on tours, which I love history, so I love going on those tours and seeing how people lived back in the day. Some of the more historic towns in North Carolina are going to include Brevard, Asheville, Murphy, and New Bern. In addition to that, Wilmington, again, one of the largest port cities on the East Coast, is also one of the oldest port cities on the East Coast, and also harbors potentially some ghosts. That's right, ghost tours are very prevalent in many of these historic towns, so definitely check them out. And we're talking about South Carolina historic towns. Of course, Charleston is at the top of the list, Beaufort, and Bluffton. All these cities and towns are beautiful and make for a great weekend away to walk and tour the streets, imagining what it was like to live there back in the 17th century. Now again, while both states have opportunity to live in these historic towns, North Carolina, which is larger, has a larger population and more towns and cities, of course, has more historic sites. So they do take the cake if you want more, but both of these particular states have plenty to offer if you want to do that. All right, so let's talk about state taxes and taxes for retirees. Big difference here, all right? So back for the last several years, I would say South Carolina would have won this with lower state taxes. However, over the last couple of years, North Carolina has made a lot of tax changes and has actually moved way up the list. In fact, South Carolina had the 40th highest tax in the country, followed up by North Carolina as the 31st highest tax in the country. Now, we're not just talking about property taxes, we're talking about overall taxes. So let's dive a little bit deeper and take a look why North Carolina has lower taxes and opportunity. Now, there's a lot of variations and factors that you need to consider when looking into individual taxes. When you take all of these into consideration, you're going to get the real picture. So let's take a look at some of the things that, of course, make it a little bit different. Now, for the first piece, neither state has Social Security tax, which is pretty helpful. Now, when we're looking at individual taxes, South Carolina has a slightly higher rate. Now, we're talking about individual taxes. South Carolina has a higher rate and slightly higher exemptions. Now, we're looking at sales tax. North Carolina has 1.25% less or lower than South Carolina. However, local taxes can reduce the difference. So it depends upon where exactly you're living. One thing to consider with South Carolina is if you are retired, retirement income tax is a bit more favorable. Now, if we're looking at North Carolina has slightly higher taxes when it comes to property as a percentage of the home value. And neither state has estate or inheritance tax. So yes, these are some of the factors, but as all are looked at equally across the country, you're still going to find that South Carolina is slightly more expensive with everything encompassed together when it comes to taxes than it is North Carolina. So take your pick. Where are you in your life and what do you need? A lot of people do tend to work in Charlotte and live in South Carolina just because of the real estate taxes alone. But if you're at a different season in your life and you're looking for the future, North Carolina might be the place to go to reduce those taxes when it comes to retirement. So take a closer look and take your pick. Now, we're talking about job markets for both North and South Carolina. You're going to find that both of them have higher levels or higher percentages of employment than the rest of the country, and both have a lower cost of living than the rest of the country. But when we're comparing just the two, which one wins? Now, in doing this comparison, we're not going state by state. Instead, we're looking at the two largest cities, Charlotte in North Carolina and Charleston in South Carolina. Now, the current unemployment rate in Charlotte is about 4.9%, while Charleston is about 4%. Now, this is still below the national average of 6%, so both of them are still in a really great spot. Where they differ greatly is going to be in job growth. Now, Charlotte is a larger city and it has more room for expansion. In addition to that, the cost of living from Charlotte versus Charleston is far lower. What we're going to find, though, is the opportunity for job growth is far higher in Charlotte, with an expected growth of 45%. In Charleston, it's about 35%. That's a big difference. Now, this is estimated over the next 10 years, so obviously there's going to be some change there. But when we're looking at the rest of the nation, what's expected over the next 10 years is a 33% increase in job opportunity and growth. So Charlotte definitely takes the cake because it's far ahead of the national average, whereby Charleston is lagging behind and sitting about where the national average is. This makes sense though. Charlotte is one of the top 10 cities that people are moving to and migrating from larger cities to come to. So is North Carolina or South Carolina better for you and your family? Well, I've put a lot of information out there and there's a lot of differences. Now it's up to you. Which one works for your family? Which one makes more sense? And which one can you grow with? In my personal opinion, North Carolina still beats South Carolina almost every time, but it depends upon what you desire in your home and your community. So, like I said, whether it's 9 days or 90 days, if you're moving across the country or just across town, I would love to help you in making that move everything you want it to be. Call, text, email, set up a Zoom chat with me. I'd love to help you. And until my next video, I look forward to showing you around town.